the following announcements. Memberships and renewals are still ongoing until 10:30 a.m. today. Just today. Only those who will process their memberships on or before 10:30 a.m. today will be able to receive the ballots for voting for our next set of Board of Trustees. We will resume accepting new members and membership renewals tomorrow, Friday. If you have paid your annual dues already but haven't filled up the Google form, please do so. Only those who completed the form will receive the ballots for our elections. Kindly approach the registration desk outside for any concerns. Oral presenters, kindly send your presentations to the Symposium Committee via email at symposium@biodiversity.ph at least one day before your scheduled talk. And lastly, for those who successfully applied for student grants, kindly approach the Secretariat desk outside to get your reimbursement forms. BCSP would like to thank the generous support of all the partners and sponsors for this event. Energy Development Corporation, Forest Foundation Philippines, the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the DENR, the Biodiversity Research Laboratory of the Institute of Biology, UP Diliman, Foundation for the Philippine Environment, Wildlife Conservation Society Philippines, UNDP, and the Biodiversity Finance Initiative Philippines, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, the Office of the Provincial Governor of Iloilo, the Office of the Iloilo City Mayor, GIZ, and the International Climate Initiative through the Transcend Project, the Biodiversity Foundation of the Philippines Incorporated, Conservation International Philippines, the Climate Reality Project Philippines, the Zoological Society of London, Philippines, Paul Caldi Coffee, Life Bank Foundation Incorporated, and the SM Store Iloilo. The plenary session for today will revolve around the theme Climate and the interface between biodiversity conservation and climate mitigation and adaptation. Ako po si Anton Lorenzo, and I will be your session moderator for this morning. Before we begin, we would like to go over some house rules. This plenary session will be made up of 2 successive presentations lasting 30 minutes each, followed by a 30-minute open forum. Throughout the session, please kindly avoid any actions that may distract our presenters and disrupt presentations, including, but not limited to, making noise, making loud, excessive, or unnecessary noises, making or taking calls, and flash photography. During the open forum, kindly raise your hand if you have a question or set of questions, and I will try my best to accommodate your questions po. We encourage everyone to keep their questions brief, civil, and polite. Finally, some additional reminders. All photographs and other presentation materials are protected by copyright. If you need a certificate of attendance for this symposium, kindly approach our registration desk outside. When sharing your experiences today on social media, please use the hashtags #BCSP@32 and #BiodiversityPH. All right, let's get the ball rolling. Our first speaker for today has worked for over 20 years with the world's leading organizations for environment, food and agriculture, and sustainable development. In key executive management and scientific leadership roles across Asia and in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. He currently works for IUCN, or the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the world's largest and oldest environmental organization. As the Asia Regional Director and Oceania Hub Director, he leads the IUCN's 48-country program, providing science-based guidance on nature-positive policies, programs, and investments to governments, non-government, and local organizations and the private business sector. He started his career with the CGIAR, the world's largest agricultural research for development partnership, as senior scientist for international research centers headquartered in Peru and Colombia. He also worked with the United Nations International Labour Organization, or ILO, to support business enterprise continuity amidst the triple risks of climate change, COVID-19 pandemic, and humanitarian emergencies. He also holds a PhD in agriculture and environment sciences for Wageningen University in the Netherlands. He will be joining us remotely and has generously provided everyone a handout, which is, I think, already placed in your respective tables, to guide us through his talk. Let's make him feel the warmest BCSP welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dindo M. Campilan.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly. Okay, thank you. Maayong aga, maayong buntag, magandang umaga po, and thank you BCSP for inviting me. Harley, of course, and Nancy from ADC. My apologies, I'm not able to join you today as I'm in between travels. I was asked to speak today about climate in relation to biodiversity, and I'm going to focus specifically, knowing there are many young professionals around, on what the future looks like for careers in biodiversity. So let me share my PowerPoint. So I hope you can see my slides now. Okay. We have been talking in the past 2 days now, or 3 days here in BCSP, on biodiversity, and today we are talking about how it connects to climate and the biodiversity climate resilience nexus. But today I'd like to take it a step forward by also encouraging you to look at biodiversity in the context of a nature-positive world. I'm going to cover 3 points. The first one is take you to a journey on what's the global state of science and scientific knowledge on biodiversity, and what is next after this conference, after the symposium that you had today. What are the next areas of work that we should focus on? And more importantly, we talk about what kind of next generation professionals should we be nurturing and molding to take on the next challenges when it comes to biodiversity research and practice. And finally, of course, as IUCN, I'd like to encourage you to engage with us. And so what are some of the specific opportunities to engage with IUCN when it comes to promoting generation and use of biodiversity knowledge? So let's start with biodiversity knowledge, because these 3 days you are making presentations, having discussions around the state of knowledge on biodiversity. So the big question is, what's next for research and practice? After years and decades of doing biodiversity work, is there something that we still don't know about biodiversity and nature? Two months ago, I was at the UN Ocean Conference, and it made me realize that the answer to the question is no. The conclusion from the Ocean Conference, we're talking about ocean biodiversity, simply, we know much more about outer space than what we know about marine biodiversity. And that, to me, is an important point for all of us today, that there is still a vast knowledge, vast area of unknown that we still have to uncover and to take advantage of. Let me point out a few of the current global trends when it comes to biodiversity thinking. And I was scrolling and looking at some of the paper presentations you have been making from yesterday, today, and also tomorrow. What are some of those trends that might be useful for us to contextualize your discussion? any person, any professional working on biodiversity by now should be familiar and should be associated with the concept of bending the curve. This is a concept in biodiversity science that is so critical because we're talking about 2030. You see here the graph is from Nature. What does it mean when we say bending the curve? It means what are the scenarios depending on our conservation actions for biodiversity? If you look at, so there's a timeline from 1970 to the next century, and you have here we're nearing 2030 in the middle. If we are going to do business as usual right now, the state of biodiversity is going to go down. That's the gray line that you see. If we do our current conservation action, but without sustainable production and consumption, that is the orange one, or you might say it's a yellow, which is still down. So how do we bend the curve? It must come about with conservation action, but also responsible and sustainable production and consumption. And that is the green one. We say bending the curve because right now, 2025, and 5 years to go to 2030, we have half a decade to make sure that biodiversity loss, the pathway of biodiversity loss, is reversed and that we bend the curve so that by 2050 and beyond, we are able to restore nature and biodiversity to what it was a century ago. So the key message today is, yes, we talk about conservation, and which is important, but it must come with more responsible human behavior. Also, we must think of biodiversity and its connection to food systems and even our behavior as consumers. And that is why if you look at IPCC, IPBES, and of course IUCN, we look at biodiversity loss, but we also recognize that, well, there's a triple environmental planetary crisis that the United Nations is referring to. We must look at biodiversity loss along with climate change and along with pollution and waste. In the first place, global science has established that biodiversity loss and climate change are two sides of the same coin. You cannot address climate change without addressing biodiversity loss and vice versa. And on a more practical level, I'm often concerned when I'm invited to conferences, such as this one, where you have, of course, the biodiversity community, and there might be only a few from the climate change community, or how many climate change conferences I've been asked to speak on. And then I see very few from the biodiversity sector. The first thing we need to do now is to bring them together, to bring the three communities of climate, biodiversity, and environmental pollution together. That's the only way to move forward, and that's the only way to what we say, bending the curve. Second one, I'm sure if there are three words that you've been mentioning since the beginning of this symposium, would be environment, nature, and biodiversity. In the global space, it's a bit disconcerting that people seem to use these three terms interchangeably. And I think you, being the biodiversity community, have an important responsibility to make sure that we are referring to biodiversity or nature environment in the right context. I don't need to tell you because most of you, or often all of you, have learned this from your biology 11 courses. But as we know, when you speak of environment, it's everything that surrounds us, both the natural and the human-made. Nature is that part of the environment that refers to the natural living and non-living components existing on Earth, while biodiversity is the living component of nature. Why is this important? Because as responsible professionals, we should be using the right language and also the right concepts when referring to the challenges and problems that we face. Let's take plastic pollution as an example. You're familiar with that. Right now, we're in the midst of supporting the world agree on a legally binding treaty against plastic pollution. The question is, and in your everyday lives, is plastic pollution a problem of the environment, of nature, or of biodiversity? What do you think? Especially look at the map, and you have the Philippines there, being in the map of the key countries where you have mismanaged plastic waste. So is plastic pollution a problem of the environment, of nature, and biodiversity? So plastic in general, although it comes from fossil fuel, can be said is human-made. It's placed, it's used into the various products we've probably been using in this conference I do hope this is a plastic-free symposium in a way. But how does it relate to nature if plastic is actually human-made? And how does it relate to biodiversity? Now, if you think about it, there is a connection of plastic as human-made to nature simply because you see plastic waste that are affecting our waterways, our rivers, even the soil. But at the same time, how does it connect to the living part? Well, we talk about marine microplastics and how microplastics end up in the marine ecosystem and affecting species diversity in our oceans and coastal areas. Right now, the main challenge when it comes to this treaty negotiation is there is not enough specificity. The treaty drafts talks about environment. We and you are responsible for advocating and making sure that treaties or conventions or agreements that seem to be about the environment need to be more specific and deliberately need to refer to biodiversity. Otherwise, we might have a treaty on plastic against plastic pollution that really uses the language of environment when we want to make sure that the world recognizes the impact of plastic pollution on biodiversity specifically. Third one, and this is part of your symposium theme, you talk about health. The world now talks about One Health and many other aspects, but I think it's important to understand that health is one dimension of human well-being, and our focus should really be on the entirety of human well-being, which not only includes the absence of diseases, health, better nutrition, but also human security, secure lives and livelihoods, including sustainable lifestyle and the enabling environment. So the connection here is there a connection between biodiversity and health? Yes, and it's a big yes. If you look at the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework, it's obvious. You have at least 8 of the targets in the current Global Biodiversity Framework directly referencing human well-being, whether it's health, it's nutrition, or its secure livelihoods. So there is a multilateral framework that exists now that all of us, the Philippines government and every organization, every individual, there's no more excuse to saying, no, we cannot see a connection. But our message is let's look at health within the context of the entire human well-being. So briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with us, so why are we talking about this? What are we as IUCN? Every time I ask individuals and groups, what do you know about IUCN? The first thing you say is, you're the red list. And that's true, but it's really partly true, and just a small part of what we do. So we're the world's largest environment organization, but what really makes us distinct is that we're not just an organization of state members, of countries, of governments, but we convene both state and unstate members in over 170 countries. And our members, therefore, include not only governments and government agencies, but also NGOs, even subnational governments, cities, municipalities, and provinces, because we believe that the frontliners of biodiversity conservation are really those at the subnational levels, LGUs in the Philippines. We also have indigenous peoples and local communities as members because we believe they cannot just be beneficiaries, target populations. They have to be front and center part of our governance. So that's what makes us unique because we're the only one kind of organization in the world which operates like a UN organization, but also convenes the voices of those which would otherwise not have been heard in many of these international platforms. But our other important role is really being the global scientific authority on the nature world and its conservation. What that means, the world comes to us in reference to the global standards relating to nature and biodiversity conservation. So yes, we talk about the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. It's practically the Bible of species conservation. Whether you're a country, you're the UN, you're a donor, you're a community, you look at the Red List as a reference on the status of a particular species that you're interested in, including many that you are presenting in the symposium. The news is, by the way, there's no longer just one Red List. There's also a Red List of Ecosystems, RLE. And a week ago, I've just received an invitation from DENR. I think BNB is in the room. requesting us to conduct a training on the red list of ecosystems. I'm going to refer to that later on. A third and important role that we play, and which is really a major part of what I do now at IUCN, is in relation to international environmental conventions and multilateral agreements. We talk about the Rio Conventions, biodiversity, CBD, climate, UNFCCC, land health, UNCCD. These Rio Conventions, and they're called Rio Conventions because they were born out of the Earth Summit in 1992, they came out of IUCN resolutions. So we, as IUCN, have responsibility to directly assist parties and for the convention itself to agree on new actions and targets. Besides the Rio Conventions, we play an important role in many of the other environmental agreements. Ramsar, I hope you're familiar, is for the wetlands. We just had the COP weeks ago in Africa. CITES, which is the Convention for Illegal Trade of Endangered Species, TMS for migratory species, or even the World Heritage. So there's been a lot of interest recently about the Convention of World Heritage, the Philippines wanting to nominate several sites. You probably are not aware IUCN is front and center for any World Heritage nomination. When a country submits a nomination to the UNESCO Secretariat, it comes to us. And our role is to help countries not only in the boundary definition, but also in the assessment whether a particular site constitutes locations or sites which are of universal value. And our role as a UN permanent observer with a consultative status in the General Assembly in New York. So we have done an exercise recently looking at what's going to be the challenge of nature and nature conservation in the next 20 years. And I'd like to share this with you because from a global perspective, it's going to inform you on what does the world expects of biodiversity and of nature in general in terms of our priorities. We see 10 global transformations for nature in the next 20 years up to the mid-century. And I'm putting this up here because these are the big ticket items that may come out in your discussion today. And this relates to what do we think we, the IUCN global community, are the important priorities that we should be addressing in terms of nature global transformation. And in the next 4 years, we also define, based on the scenario analysis, what are the important areas of biodiversity knowledge that we must generate and share for decision-making and action. Again, you see the right keywords there, and I hope you could relate to them. So taken overall, this is what we believe is the roadmap to prioritizing what you do in your own individual and organizational ways of what the world looks like in terms of the work around biodiversity. But this is the global picture. I think you, in these 3 days, have an important responsibility to come up with something similar, something for the Philippines. What would the Philippines scenario look like in terms of the global transformations necessary for biodiversity? And in the immediate future, what areas of biodiversity knowledge should we be focusing on? I do hope that the proceedings of the symposium will come up with something similar. And then we can see how they complement, how they align with the global picture as presented here, which is an exercise in 170 countries. So, having identified and having given you a snapshot of what the global nature and biodiversity world looks like, the next question is, what kind of next generation professionals are we going to nurture, are we going to develop, are we going to produce from universities to make sure that we have what we call workplace-ready change makers? Many of those in the room today are probably students or young professionals, and you're asking yourself, am I in the right career track working in biodiversity? Or within biodiversity, what specific areas or directions should I be focusing on? I really believe that given the important and the critical gap in knowledge for biodiversity, there is much to be done. And we need core biodiversity experts and professionals, the ones who understand how to differentiate biodiversity, environment, and knowledge. The ones who understand that when you speak of biodiversity, we're talking about intraspecific genetic diversity, we're talking species, but we're also talking of ecosystem diversity. But beyond the usual products and graduates that we make, what are the important areas of biodiversity professional pursuits that we want to encourage and what the world needs to be able to address to the challenges I just mentioned earlier? I'll come up with a few examples of what would be career directions, what kinds of professionals we need more of. That's what we call the next generation professionals. First of all, I think it's very important to have professionals that understand how to differentiate and recalibrate knowledge products. I have here a hierarchy of knowledge products to illustrate that we need to distinguish between biodiversity knowledge in general, the knowledge base, those of us who work on developing biodiversity conservation approaches, methods, and tools, and standards as well as assurance and certification. Why do we need to distinguish this? Because you need to identify yourself. Where are you in this hierarchy? Where do you want to be? And how do you complement what others are doing? So, for example, the research project you're doing, the paper you're presenting in the symposium, is simply to inform the state of knowledge, the maybe identification of threatened species, maybe an assessment of biodiversity in key ecosystems. That is to inform, and that's very, very important. In IUCN, we have many of those examples. We produce several outlook reports, we produce position papers. At a higher level, many of you don't just want to inform. You develop certain tools, methodologies, which are intended to guide and support conservation action. And we have thousands and thousands of those because every author, every professional wants to have a method or a tool attached to their respective names. And that is fine. But then we cannot just have a plethora of tools and methods multiplying around the world. We need to harmonize them. And this is where we think about standards. And standards can be national standards, they can be local standards, but ideally they should be global standards. And this is where IUCN comes in. So we have various methods and tools, but more importantly, we set standards in the area of biodiversity conservation. And more than that, we make sure that there is a system of assurance and certification. So when we talk about the red list, whether it's the threatened species or of ecosystems, we provide the standards in terms of the classification. I'm reminded of the red list of ecosystem because the reason there is now a red list of ecosystem depends on the book you're reading, depends on the professor you're listening to. They will have their own way of classifying ecosystems. Now with the global standard on RLE, there is only one global standard typology on how you identify, categorize, classify ecosystems. There are many of these examples, and you have the green list is another one. But let me point out the KBA because I realized you did have sessions on KBA. So we congratulate the Philippines for the interest in the key biodiversity areas. And I'm sure that's been well explained by your resource persons. But the important point is this. The KBA can be used by every country, such as the Philippines, to identify its key biodiversity areas. But remember, the KBA is a global standard. You can have the Philippine KBA, but if it's just a Philippine KBA, if it doesn't align with the criteria for the global KBA standard, to make sure that the identified areas you have here in the Philippines becomes part of the global map. So our role as IUCN is really to help you, to assist you, to make sure that the KBA standard that you are applying in the Philippines is not just useful for the Philippines, but becomes part of the global picture that we're providing on KBA. Now it's an important point because we talk about climate and biodiversity. I'm often asked by a lot of colleagues and a lot of people who are getting confused about the many terms that are being thrown around us, talking about carbon footprint, neutrality, biodiversity offset, even carbon biodiversity credits, yes, zero waste circular economy, land degradation. We often hear the private sector talking about being green and clean. It's important, again, that we have professionals who understand not only the climate part, but also the nature part, but also how they interrelate as targets for sustainable development. Many, many years ago, we started by saying all we need to do is mitigate negative impact. And that is, how do we reduce adverse impact of what we do So the popular term then was low carbon development, managing acceptable levels of negative impact on climate. And the justification then is we cannot avoid negative consequences, but we can mitigate and we can minimize them. More recently, we talk about net zero. And so net zero is often about maintaining neutrality in carbon or neutrality in GHG emission. What is different here is we're no longer talking about carbon per se, but when we say net zero, we talk about the various GHGs, and that our work is to offset and compensate for the negative impact of carbon and GHG emission. So we talk about neutrality and net zero. But now we know it's not enough if you refer to bending the curve. We need not just to address climate, but we must halt and reverse the loss of nature at a rate faster than its degradation, opposite to what is happening now, where the rate of loss of nature is at a rate much faster than its reversal or regeneration. And that's why we talk about biodiversity net gain. And why is this significant? Because the pathway no longer talks about carbon, no longer talks about climate. So when we talk about nature positive outcomes, we really talk about how we can be net zero in terms of GHGs, but we can also be nature positive. The important thing here, and I think it'll be good for you to debate on this in the symposium, it's not a linear process, and there are trade-offs. Many of the climate solutions that we promote do not necessarily result in nature positive outcomes. A favorite example of mine, and because ACD is here, is renewable energy. We always think the renewable energy is good because it helps us in maintaining neutrality and addressing emission, which is really true. But remember, in the process, and if you're not careful, you end up cutting down trees and forests, or maybe mangroves in coastal areas to install wind turbines and other infrastructure. So we have organizations like ECD wanting to make sure that they're not just net zero, that they are also nature positive. What kind of other professionals do we need? I think these days we also need more professionals who understand and who can act on what we call transboundary ecosystem management. Oftentimes we look at biodiversity conservation as being very localized in communities, in specific biomes. But much of the challenge when it comes to ecosystem management is really transboundary. And that's because many of the water ecosystems that we have, many marine ecosystems we have, or even forests, do not really follow political lines. I have three examples here. One is the work we do in the Mekong River. As you know, the Mekong River stretches all the way from the north, from China, all the way down to Thailand. So how do you bring different countries manage the Mekong River basin in a way that you protect biodiversity, but also support sustainable use? For the Philippines, a good example is, of course, the Coral Triangle. It's really the world's most diverse marine areas. And the last example is something different. It's called the East Asian Australasia Flyways. Some of you are also working around water birds, for example. And you see there that when you talk about migratory water birds, you're talking about birds that migrate and move between Russia and China, the two Koreas, all the way to New Zealand and Australia, including staging points in the Philippines. So this is where the transboundary nature comes in, because we need to make sure that countries work together across boundaries to ensure that these migratory water birds are able to survive, are able to thrive through the different seasons. It's important to point this out because one of the staging areas, stopover areas of these migratory water birds is actually the Philippines. And it's not just the Philippines. It's the location, a specific location in Bulacan, where this new airport is being built. At a higher level, it's important to have next generation professionals with an interest in using their biodiversity knowledge to engage with to take on careers relating to multilateral policy engagement. Multilateral meaning intergovernmental, multiple parties that are involved in crafting global policies around the environment. Some of you are probably referring to SDGs, for example, in your presentation. Now, the SDGs, that's 2030, it's 5 years away. Take a look at this. Where are we in terms of SDGs progress right here in the Asia Pacific? I mean, we have already raised the white flag. We are never going to achieve SDG targets given the progress and the status we have at the moment. You look at 2024 and you look at each of the SDGs. Worst part is there's even one target there, one goal that is retrogressing. And look at it, what is it? It's climate action. This simple graph is very important for us to identify where do we have competent professionals to help us advance on SDGs, because clearly we have failed the world in terms of achieving these 2030 targets. And what are some of those where we have not advanced much? Life below water, what does it mean? We need more people who understand biodiversity in the oceans, in the marine ecosystems, in the coastal areas. Responsible consumption and production. Professionals are able to understand the connection between biodiversity, dietary, and food choices. Worse is, if you look at it, there's one gray. There are actually two grays, but one of them is that this region doesn't even have the right and adequate and reliable data on gender. So I think this is a good menu of how you want to pursue in terms of your own careers, connecting biodiversity to different SDGs. But since we're talking about climate, let me give you another example, which is around NDCs. And I'm sure you're talking about NDCs throughout this symposium. But you see, the important thing is, how do we include nature, and that's including biodiversity, in this nationally determined contribution? The good news is, and as you can see in this list for Asia Pacific, 43 of the 48 countries have already indicated in their NDCs that they are going to use nature-based solutions. And that includes the Philippines. The nationally determined contribution out of the Philippines will include the use of nature-based solutions. The problem is the Philippines and most other countries who claim to use NBS only include a few lines saying that they're going to use nature-based solution, but have not even explained what is the baseline, what is the target, how they're going to move from the baseline to the target. So our role has been to help countries, including the Philippines, to now update their NDCs so that the role of nature is more articulated in terms of the metrics and in terms of the targets. So in the Philippines, you have an important and a critical role to make sure that nature is included in that nationally determined contributions. A totally different area, which I think also needs more attention and more professionals, is really around sustainable finance for nature. I am aware there are many initiatives in the Philippines. I see BioFin also as part of this conference. But you see, the challenge here is you cannot do conservation action without the right finance. So how do we cultivate biodiversity experts that also understand financing instruments? Because oftentimes we have biodiversity experts who do conservation work, but do not really focus on mobilizing the right resources. And you have people who make decisions about finance and resources, have no understanding about natural capital or the value of why do we invest in nature. I'm providing 3 examples which illustrate what kind of next generation professionals that we need. There's the Asian Development Bank. This is the finance platform we're working with. This is a $5 billion platform. It's specific to investing and supporting nature solutions and nature solution finance. Another one in Indonesia is what we call the Indonesia Coral Bond. It's an innovative ocean financing instrument. You're all familiar with impact bonds. Now, this is unique because the payoff of bonds is based on conservation goals using Green List and using IUCN tools and products as the basis for independent verification of conservation outcomes. So you need to understand the finance side. What is an impact bond? But you also need to understand what is conservation outcome, let's say coral reef health or fish biomass. And then you have all of this multilateral financing between GEF and GCF. This is an open world right now because there are very few people who understand both. And I think we need biodiversity experts who also need to understand, who are capable to design projects that catalyze different private and public capital flows. We cannot pretend that we can continue to do nature conservation without taking advantage of technology. At the moment, we also need next generation professionals who are able to understand, who are able to harness the power of technology, but at the same time to mitigate the risks that are associated with it. In IUCN, this is the area that we're working on. How do we keep the balance between the use of technology, including AI, many of the geospatial technology, but making sure that they are contributing to our overall species conservation or protected areas management goal. In fact, an area that we are now working on policy-wise is actually the global challenge of how do you address nature conservation and synthetic biology or biotechnology. I'm not sure if there's a session discussing that today. But you see, on the one hand, you have the global community around biotechnology. On the other hand, you have a global community still focusing on nature conservation. Should we, as biodiversity experts, shun and distance from biotechnology? So is there a common ground? What are the risks and what are the opportunities? So I think this is a space where we need more people to understand, to help us shed light on how do we avoid the risk, but also making sure that we take advantage of new technology. More recently, I've also been in discussion with many universities, engineering schools, schools producing architects on this whole area of green and gray hybrid solution. Because there's a tendency for us working in nature to always say nature-based solution is the answer to everything. But the reality is it's not. In fact, in many cases, we need what are so-called hybrid solutions. Hybrid meaning we look at possibilities to design solutions which take advantage of both the green and the gray infrastructure. But that is not an easy path because in universities, we don't really train engineers or architects to think about blending nature-based options and gray infrastructure. So we have in certain countries a program called Greening the Engineers, where after they learn to construct gray infrastructure, they're also exposed to learning opportunities to designing what we call as hybrid solutions. An important one is also in the area of law, governance, and rights. We cannot talk about conservation without making sure that it is inclusive and equitable. And we need to go beyond, again, our conservation community. As an example, we deal with illegal wildlife trade. But you see, this is an issue that refers to the legal community. And this is where judges and prosecutors are very important because they're the ones that make a case. They're the ones that pass judgment on environmental crimes. But they need to know what is the value of an endangered species. What is the value of an illegally traded animal, for example, so that they know whether they would impose a life sentence or 5 years or 6 months or whatever. So we have a program, for example, on training judges and prosecutors on environmental crimes so that they understand that the value and the damage caused to biodiversity merits a corresponding sentence to those that have been brought to court. On the other hand, and this is a more recent one, is how we participate in international law proceedings. And this is fresh because the outcome just came about 2 weeks ago. And this is with the International Court of Justice, ICJ. It's in The Hague, but it's not the same as the ICC. They're different. It's not a criminal court. The International Court of Justice is the world court. It provides arbitration between countries, for example, or it provides advice, legal advice to the United Nations. A few months ago, IUCN was invited to make an expert advisory opinion to the court on a case that was brought up. Can countries and national governments be held accountable, legally accountable, for the damage and the loss caused by climate change when the government doesn't act in behalf of local population? In other words, if there's a barangay or a municipality that's caused by typhoon suffering damage, and you can prove that it's because of the neglect of your local government or of a national department ministry, can they be actually sued? And the result came out 2 weeks ago. The answer is yes. So now it's not only irresponsible, but it is also illegal for governments to ignore and to do its role in protecting its people from the effects of climate change, including disaster risk. Now this legal decision is going to open a floodgate of cases, probably, because now the world knows, you know, that you can sue your mayor or your president or your secretary. This is where IUCN plays an important role of bringing biodiversity knowledge into the halls of the International Court of Justice. An important element, again, is also we need professionals that are able to go beyond the boundaries of conservation. We take comfort attending biodiversity conservation conferences because we are able to mingle and to share and to connect with like-minded individuals, such as what's happening now. But we need to go outside. We cannot be preaching to the choir. We cannot be converting the converted. And so cross-sectoral convergence is important. What are some of the examples we have? We have a global initiative called Sports for Nature. So what is the connection with sports and nature? Well, first of all, we talk about human well-being. We know how sports contribute to better lifestyle and better health and even better nutrition. But there's another important element. Sports and the sports sector has been known to be one of the greatest threats to biodiversity conservation. I mean, you look at the Olympics, you look at the many sports events happening regionally around the world, even nationally. You construct all of these infrastructures, have the events for 1 or 2 weeks, and then after that, then what happens? In the meantime, you have cut down all the trees, you have removed the greens and put concretes. So we work on making sports events more sustainable, green, and nature positive. At the same time, using sports and the athletes as the champions and the voices for espousing and promoting the cause of biodiversity. In fact, our own team, our program team, consists of real-world athletes because they're the ones who have the capacity but also the credibility to work on sports for nature. I'm sure there are sessions happening in this forum around One Health. So I'm not going to espouse on that, except to say that it's one example of really bringing human health and environmental health in one framing. And that's, for example, the work that we do with the World Health Organization and with many other organizations, not only human health, but also animal health, including for zoonotic diseases. And then, of course, the private business sector. You cannot really continue working on biodiversity conservation without the private business sector because they are central and key to promoting that. So around the world, around the region, we work with many of the key companies, Toyota in this part of the world, but also many other types, where we help change their way of doing business so that their sustainability targets are truly nature positive. Okay, having said that, the final slide is an invitation for all of you, individually as organizations, to engage with us and be part of IUCN. I've just realized that some of you in the room are already members of our global scientific commissions. So one part of IUCN are our 7 global scientific commissions, and you have there in the list. And this is the global community, the world's leading experts of 18,000 plus members. If you have any question, or you want to seek guidance, or you want to access knowledge and expertise, you go to these commissions. And these commissions range from a commission on education, communication, ecosystem management, down to protected areas and climate crisis. It is available and open to anybody. want to be part of this global community, remember this is the go-to commissions, the go-to groups of the world's leading experts. And I think it's good for you in terms of networking. It's good for your CVs to say that you're part of an IUCN and Global Scientific Commission. Of course, more than just individual members, we encourage you to be part of IUCN as organizations. I'm really happy Arlie is here, and I'm proud to mention some of the members that we have, led by Haribon, and of course DANR, representing the national government in the IUCN National Committee. I hope by today's presentation, we encourage many of you to also consider becoming a member of IUCN. And you can ask our members, which are in this symposium, how to become one or what are the benefits. And I think all of these members we have are actually represented in this event. But beyond members, we also have partners. And this is just to give you an illustration of the diversity of partners we have around the world, in the region, but even in the Philippines. I'm really happy we have EDC as part of this event because we're working on them on nature and renewables. Many of you come from universities and colleges. We do hope we'll be able to expand beyond where we have connections right now with UPLB. I'm actually going to Mindanao in about 2 months to CMU. And then there's the Philippine Network of Environmental Educators, where many of your universities and colleges are also part of or a member of. And if you're interested, you can contact the Secretariat of PNEE. I think the president is still Dr. Gascon, or the Secretariat is at UPLB in CESAM. The other important one is, of course, capacity building. So IUCN invests a lot of its resources in nurturing future generation professionals through our IUCN Academy. So again, you can learn about biodiversity, you can learn about nature from many different sources, many different trainings, and many different events. But if you would like to have professional certification, let's say in nature-based solution or in finance, then you come to IUCN because we're the one and only that provides this global professional certification. We work around nature-based education with universities around the world, and we have special initiatives to support what we call change makers, young professionals, to be there in the global stage, to join us in the many events beyond the local communities, and to put a spotlight on what they're working on. IUCN has a wide range of grant-making schemes, and we have a few of them. We have a few grantees actually from the Philippines, ranging from ecosystem-based adaptation. We have grants on blue carbon, on subnational climate finance. The one at the bottom is current because it's ongoing, which is a specific grant on gender-related violence and conservation. It's called RISE, Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Environment. Take advantage of these opportunities for us to provide seed funding for you in your conservation work. And more importantly, we do have a scheme we call the IUCN Asia Talent Pool, which provides you with opportunities as visiting professionals, professional volunteers, student interns, recent graduates, because the situation is this. Some of you may be interested to pursue an international career in conservation, but you don't get employed because you don't have the experience. But then you don't get the experience because you don't get employed. So then it becomes an egg and chicken question. If you're interested, you can look at the opportunities, visit a website on what are some of those opportunities that we offer to both the young and the not so young professionals. Thank you very much, and let's stay connected. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campilan. Hopefully, maraming na-inspire sa ating audience at nagkaroon ng insights based sa presentation ni Dr. Campilan, most especially our Gen Z change makers. Those with questions for Dr. Campilan are invited to park them first and put them forward during the Q&A session once all of the speakers have delivered their presentations. Our second and final speaker is an environmental professional with expertise in renewable energy, carbon finance, community ecology, and climate public health policy. As the energy program lead at the Climate Reality Project Philippines, he heads the Re-Energize PH initiative, where he works to improve the Green Energy Option Program, or GEOP or GEOP, through rigorous policy research, stakeholder collaboration, and nationwide public engagement. He also supports the organization's climate diplomacy program, providing technical support on the analysis and enhancement of the Philippines' nationally determined contributions or NDCs. With a background in ecology and project work across Southeast Asia, he brings a systems-based perspective to the energy transition. His research has been presented in global conferences in South Korea, Australia, and Portugal. And he holds a master's degree in biology from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Let us all welcome Mr. Giancarlo Pocholo Enriquez.
Hello? Hello. Good morning. So enough glazing about me. But essentially, I'm Poch. I'm from the Climate Reality Project Philippines. A brief background, the Climate Reality Project was founded by former US Vice President Al Gore in 2006. And he wanted to, quote-unquote, catalyze global climate action through climate reality leaders. So climate reality leaders are essentially people from all sectors and ages that undergone a climate leadership training. So the Climate Reality Project Philippines is one of its 11 branches, and we're in charge of handling the climate reality leaders in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. So in our organization, we have different projects that aims to tackle different facets of the climate crisis. So we have a project on active mobility, we have projects on plastic, climate finance, energy, and climate diplomacy. So for the climate diplomacy program, we're essentially tackling how to assist the government in the climate diplomacy mechanisms that we have. So for today, we're going to discuss some brief background on the Philippines' nationally determined contributions and its accompanying low carbon economy investment bill. Okay, there. So earlier this year, we know that the Trump administration retreated from certain environmental policies through his executive order putting America first in international climate agreements. So one of the climate agreements that he backed out from would be the Paris Agreement and other agreements under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so UNFCCC. So essentially with this executive order, he wanted to pull out funding from the climate initiatives across the world. And I think some of us would know this feeling because a lot of our projects were halted that were funded by USAID. But essentially, what is the Paris Agreement? So, yan. Okay. So, in Article 2.1a, the Paris Agreement says na there's a target for member parties to hold the increase in global average temperature from 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius. So essentially, that's what Article 2.1a says. In Article 4.2, there. So in Article 4.2, each party should prepare and maintain a successive nationally determined contributions that it intends to achieve. So these NDCs shall pursue domestic mitigation measures with the aim of achieving these NDCs. And in 4.3, it wants to ensure the succession and the continuous ambition with these NDCs with an update every 5 years, which they call the ratchet mechanism. So essentially, nationally determined contributions are climate action plans for each country. And it outlines how to reduce GHG emissions to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So right now, we are in the process of updating our nationally determined contributions. From the ratification of the Paris Agreement in 2016, we first submitted our NDCs in, well, technically 2021, but we were supposed to submit it in 2020. Then in 2023, we had a global stocktake, or essentially setting up the baselines for our GHG emissions. And this year, the Climate Change Commission and the DNR is set to revise the NDCs by October. So let's talk about our first submission of the Philippines NDC. So the Philippines had a quite ambitious, at first glance, of NDCs. So we committed 75% of GHG emissions reductions by 2030. The caveat here is that 72.29% of those NDCs are conditional. This means that the commitment that we had are dependent on external financial support. Only 2.71% of that commitment is unconditional, which means these are the only things that we can achieve through domestic resources. So that's very low, and honestly, it's quite negligible in terms of commitments. So with the NDCs, they had to create these policies and measures. And if you look at the percentage there, that's the percentage of emissions from each sector. So 21% from agriculture, 7% from waste, 6% from the industry sector, 7% from transport, and the largest one would be energy with 59%. So with these policies and measures, they expect to reduce a total of 990 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, with a total investment cost of $72 billion, and that's both domestic and with financial support from external countries. So to run through each sector, for agriculture, this refers to the emissions from crop cultivation and livestock management. And essentially, it's $1 billion in investment with 211 metric tons of carbon dioxide to be reduced. For waste, it refers to the emissions during collection, treatment, and disposal of waste materials. And it includes GHG from methane and carbon dioxide. So it's $1.6 billion in investment with 66 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. For industry, this refers to mostly the private sector, and it includes emissions from cement and steel manufacturing, chemical industries, refrigeration and air conditioning companies, electronics and semiconductor production. So that's $194 million in investments with 59 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. Next would be transportation, and if you can look at this, it's $32.8 billion in investments with a measly 67 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions reductions. And most of this would come from simplifying or lowering the emissions from fuel consumption. And lastly, for energy, energy, as we mentioned, has 59% of our emissions in the Philippines, and it accounts for fuel combustion and electricity generation. So there's 36.5 billion of investments that will go to energy with a total of 587 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents of reduction. So we have a big emissions from the energy sector because most of our power mix comes from fossil fuels. So in 2023, our power mix is composed of 23% renewables and 77% comes from fossil fuels. So if they deliver those policies and measures, we would essentially lower our emissions to around 200 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And if you can see at the graph, the unconditional targets that we have, it's mostly the same as the business as usual scenario. So it's quite negligible. So given this, according to the Climate Action Tracker, when referring to the unconditional targets, they said that it's insufficient compared to its fair share contribution. So fair share contribution essentially is our historical responsibility, which is kind of low, but our capacity to act is kind of high. So they said that we failed in that aspect. So with that critique, this is what we expect with the update on the 2025 NDCs. First, they have to establish a new baseline by remodeling the BAU trajectory from 2030 to 2040. We're expecting an increase in the unconditional targets from 2.71% to something more ambitious. And with the increase comes the decrease in the conditional target. So for the Philippines, since we already set a large number of target at 75%, the way that we're making our NDCs more ambitious is through the unconditional targets. For other countries, they essentially just change the whole number instead of micromanaging the unconditional and conditional targets. And lastly, we're also expecting to see the inclusion of the forestry sector in the 2025 NDC. So for 2020, they did not include the forestry sector because they said the forestry sector was a carbon sink. So I'm not sure if that is still true, but we will see. Okay, so given this, how can we strengthen our NDCs? Oh, ayan. So first, we have to revisit the Philippine Energy Plan. We know that most of our emissions come from energy, and with the Philippine Energy Plan, it outlines the capacity additions by technology that we have for our energy mix. So there are 3 scenarios in this plan: the reference scenario, the clean energy scenario 1, and the clean energy scenario 2. So currently, there. The installed capacity for the Philippines, most of it comes from fossil fuels, specifically coal. So 12,428 gigawatts of it comes from coal, and 3,834 comes from oil, then the rest with gas. This is not good for us because first, we know that fossil fuels have higher emissions, and because of the nature of coal, gas, and oil as products that we have to import, the volatility of the pricing makes our electricity expensive. So in 2021, during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that increased oil prices. And the following months with that, Indonesia halted the trading of coal. So if you can remember in your household bills, our electricity prices for 2021 were much higher. In terms of renewables, most of it comes from hydro, followed by geothermal. Then solar comes at third. So with the Philippine Energy Plan, this is our current scenario in 2022. We have 28,415 gigawatts. And the majority of the chunk comes from fossil fuels. In the 3 scenarios presented by the Department of Energy, essentially, there will be an increase in both fossil fuel and renewable capacity, but the majority of it will come from renewables. However, maybe it should be noted that the Philippines plans to increase its capacity mostly on gas. And they call gas right now as a transition fuel. And that is a dangerous narrative because gas is still a fossil fuel with high emissions, and it is still susceptible to price volatility. So for the Philippines to have a better energy mix, I think we should just focus on renewables. Next. So next, we have to create an inclusive and multi-stakeholder NDC process. So the government should engage critical stakeholders in all stages of decision-making and implementation. The consultations for NDCs should be at the start and not just at the end once they finish all of the decision-making process. So this should look like targeted nationwide consultations in different sectors with their insights actually integrated into the final text of the NDCs. Next, based on our engagements, there's a lot of capacity building that needs to be done. So most of the LGUs are quite hesitant in implementing their policies and measures because they lack the technical capacity to quantify their emissions. Next, we should account for the forestry sector in the NDC 2025. First, we have to set clear, measurable forest targets. We have to include the land use change, and forestry in the mitigation framework. And we have to establish baseline and quantify reforestation or deforestation goals. We have to align the forestry NDCs with existing national policies such as the PENCAS, the NCCAP, and I know CCIPH has Sukat ng Kalikasan, which we can use to further help in quantifying the forestry sector. Next, we have to improve community and IP inclusion and go beyond lip service in terms of getting their FPICs, their consent, and actually involve them in the NDC process. And lastly, we should tap climate finance that's available for us. We have RED Plus mechanisms and nature-based solutions funding, as mentioned by the previous presentation. Lastly, we have to establish a national carbon market framework. And currently in the Philippines, if you wanted to trade carbon, you have to go to international markets, such as Vera or Plan Vivo or Gold Standard. And with those international carbon markets, there is no safeguard for us to prevent the exploitation of our forests and our biodiversity. So the establishment of this carbon market framework should hopefully provide us the safeguards that we need. So accompanying that would be, ayan. Sorry. Previous slide. Thank you. So in the last Congress, they filed this low carbon economy investment bill. It's set to be refiled in the upcoming Congress, but essentially it places a carbon market structure in the Philippines. So in carbon financing, it puts price tags on carbon emissions, and it can be used as a way to fund local climate action and sustainable development with proper safeguards. So the difference between carbon markets and carbon taxes, essentially in carbon taxes, you are just paying, but in carbon markets, there is an option for you to sell if you don't meet the allowable quota. Okay. So in the provisions, it institutionalizes key mechanisms for climate change mitigation, including the Philippine Greenhouse Gas Inventory System, the National Integrated Climate Change Database and Information Exchange System, and the Climate Change Expenditure Tagging. It also mandates the development of NDCs with pathways consistent with the 2 Celsius global temperature limit. There. So most of the bill mostly covers the private sector. So covered enterprises are large enterprises with emissions from the 5 sectors that we mentioned a while ago: agriculture, waste, industry, transport, and energy. So it's the Climate Change Commission who sets which companies are covered by the law. So as a company, as a covered enterprise, you have to prepare a decarbonization goal, a decarbonization plan with the goal of reaching net zero by 2050. Next, you have to submit that plan to DNR. Then you have to submit annual compliance reports. Then you have to update that plan every 5 years. And it's similar, it's patterned to how NDCs work. Next, there. So if a covered enterprise exceeds the allowable emissions, they have to pay the corresponding carbon price. That corresponding price is called the decarbonization fund. And that decarbonization fund can be put towards 3 things. First, you can essentially invest it back to your company to reduce your emissions within the value chain. Second, you can invest into nature-based solutions projects and offset those emissions. And lastly, you can essentially just pay the government for your penalty. And these are the opportunities or incentives for covered enterprises. They would have access to carbon markets, they would have tax holidays, and they would have access to international climate finance. So the bill has a lot of flaws, and we have a lot of concerns about it. But essentially, we summarize it into 3. It, again, does not consider key stakeholders. So it's mostly concerned with the private sector, and it does not consider civil service organizations, IPs, and the academic sector. Next, it has to ensure alignment with existing legislation. So we still don't have a land use law in the Philippines. So I think we should align those laws first before continuing with this low carbon economy investment bill. And lastly, for the LCI bill, most of the responsibilities here fall to the Climate Change Commission. And if they are expected to implement the law, they have to have more technical capacity and the operational manpower to do it. And lastly, if you notice, the decarbonization fund that they pay when they exceed their emissions essentially goes back to their companies. So that has to be revisited for it to be an actual penalty and not just a slap on the wrist. Okay, so we've been going around the country and we've talked about some other sectors regarding NDCs. And what yay. So essentially what we found out is that certain regions have different problems. And of course, we have to have targeted solutions for each region. Please go on. Then, there, thank you. The data baseline for GHG emissions are lacking. And it's mostly because the LGUs don't have the capacity to do the baseline accounting. And we think that the DNR should make steps on how to capacitate LGUs or even their regional or provincial offices and how to do that. There's most of the emissions from energy can be covered by DOE. The emissions from agriculture can be covered by the Department of Agriculture. For transport, DOT. But for waste and the industry sector, it should be covered by the DNR. So there are also bureaucratic challenges in local climate change action plans, also our LCCAP development and GHG inventories. And again, this comes back to the lack of technical capacity for our LGUs. They require financial support in how to implement these. And essentially without the LGU's capacity, it would be very hard to implement the LCI bill and the NDCs. So lastly, we should leverage existing public and private partnership projects for our unconditional targets and have a more ambitious targets for our NDCs. There. Woo. One. There. So tomorrow we have a workshop and we're going to discuss essentially the low carbon economy investment bill. If you're interested to talk more about it, please attend. It's going to be at 4:30 p.m. at the American Corner. The insights that we will gather from this workshop will be submitted to the Climate Change Commission and the DNR. And hopefully, we can include insights from the academe sector for the NDCs and the LCI bill. So key takeaways, NDCs are essential instruments because it allows a guide for countries to a credible and measurable decarbonization pathway. Second, the unconditional target of 2.71% is insufficient and unambitious and should be significantly raised with the coming update this year. Future NDCs must fully integrate the policy sector with clear targets and national alignment. And lastly, public participation in the NDC process must be strengthened. So we know that the government doesn't really give that public participation to us for free. Usually it would be one-off consultations. So I guess the challenge for us in the civil service or in the civil space organizations and the academe sector is to create that space. If they do not want to listen to us, we have to demand it, and that would be the challenge for all of us. So we created a quick booklet that talks about the NDCs, and it's a very brief summary of it. Hopefully it can help a lot of people in understanding what NDCs are. And thank you. Yeah.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Enriquez. Thank you, sir, for your presentation and for sharing your work with us. At this point, we'd like to call on our three speakers, Dr. Dindo Campilan and Mr. Pocholo Enriquez. For our open forum, those with questions for our speakers, please raise your hand or kindly approach the microphones in front. And please wait to be acknowledged. So anyone who wants to ask our two speakers? Anyone po? Mukhang maagat tapos today. Alright, sige, ako muna ang mag-first question. Okay? Sana may second na mamaya. Alright, sige. This question is for Dr. Campilan. Good morning again, sir. This is related to your discussion on bending the curve a while ago. For a country like the Philippines, how do you think we can locally bend the curve to further protect our biodiversity? Sir, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry, I'm.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, now I'm muted. Thank you very much. I think there are two quick answers to that. How do we bend the curve? Number one is we need to double the effort in terms of restoration and in terms of changing the direction of our conservation efforts. In other words, what we're doing now is not enough, right? We need to change the trajectory. But that's one part, the conservation. Bending the curve also means changes beyond conservation in our lifestyle, in our consumption, in our production systems, whether it's agriculture, or forestry, or fisheries. So I think those 2 points. We need to do better conservation more, but also it's not enough. We need to change the way we live and looking at our livelihood and economic systems.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Dr. Campilan. Now, next. Any questions from the audience? There you go. Thank you, Jane.
Hello. Hi. Good morning po. Also for Dr. Campilan. For organizations present here at the symposium, we were just wondering how do we engage with the IUCN if we are not members? Yeah. Thank you po.
Thank you. You know, I see Arlie at the back behind you, smiling. I think she has the answer. Well, first of all, IUCN has many different parts. So when we talk about members, we're talking about organizations, right? And then we talk about the commissions, which constitute individuals. So you individually can become part of IUCN by applying to become members of our commissions, whether it's a commission on environmental law, climate, ecosystem management. And that's an easy one. You can just go to our website, send your application, and you can be reviewed. So then you immediately become part of that. The other one is, yes, to become a member of IUCN gives you the highest level of engagement because you get, IUCN as a democratic union, you get to vote, you get to have the speaking rights. I think earlier, the other speaker was talking about how civil society, is being displaced, doesn't have the voice. Because of our unique role in IUCN, we provide civil society, we provide LGUs the voice and the space that you otherwise won't have in the national space. Let's talk about COPs, climate COPs. You know, the Philippine delegation is determined by the Department of Foreign Affairs. And then they get nominations from different departments, DNR, DA, etc., DOST. And then you have NGOs and civil society. Most likely, you won't even be admitted as part of the Philippine delegation if you are from the NGOs. But you can go to the scopes to IUCN. And not just as part of the IUCN delegation, we have the speaking rights. So you might be a small NGO somewhere in Mindoro, in Palawan. You get to go to the COP and you get to join the IUCN voice because that's our unique role. And that's what we mean by becoming a member of IUCN. But you don't have to become immediately a member of IUCN. You can be a partner. And by partner simply means collaborating with us in different activities, whether it's for projects. ECD, we just signed an MOU several weeks ago on the Nature and Renewables Initiative. And that's why we're thinking about doing it somewhere in Mount Apo or in Mindanao. We can be partners in capacity building. Also in November, I'm going to be visiting some universities in the Philippines to look at how we can integrate all of the things I've mentioned into university curricula. We're also talking about policy engagement, how we can make sure that we support the Philippines as it updates their NDCs or its NBSAPs. And that's because we have that unique role. You see, many of the countries are state members of IUCN, or the Philippine government, the DNR, is asking for support from us on our league. So I think you can be part of IUCN as an individual. Become part of a commission. You can join any of those capacity building networking opportunities that we have. You just go to our website. But as an organization, you can also be a member or you can be a partner. But there are many people around the room today, starting with Arlie. Speak to them and find out what's the value addition of what we do as IUCN. We need more of you because you are the frontliners. Our role as IUCN is really to support you. As a global organization, Our role is to empower, capacitate, and also to help you network with other people, with other professionals seeking the same career and organizational goal. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campilan. All right, any questions? Yes, Ma'am Moon. Yes, please approach the microphone na lang po. Salamat po.
May taas ng kamay. Good morning for the Climate Reality Project. So, sorry, I might have just missed it. So, the low carbon bill, there's an ongoing, you're going to do the consultation. Just wondering what will be the next step. Have you already identified the champion from the legislation group from the House of the Representatives and the Senate?
Can you repeat because it's a little
Champions, the Senate. Do you already have a
yes.
champion and also in the
Okay,
legislation?
for the LCI bill in the House, I think another person will have to file it because they lost the elections. Yeah, but for the Senate, we are expecting Senator Lauren to file the counterpart bill because she also filed a similar bill last Congress. Thank you.
Okay, maraming salamat po. Next po, for Mr. Porcholo. Yes, ma'am. Kindly approach. Sorry po, ma'am. Yes po, sorry. Unahin lang po muna natin si Mama. Yes po. Sige po.
This, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask the IUCN about the coverage of the ICJ when it comes to environmental crimes. Can a single IP approach the International Court of Justice as to environmental crimes? What are the coverage in case? Because you are the consultant of the UN. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. There are actually many existing international organizations and local organizations specialized in wildlife crimes. Rather than for a single individual organization to go straight to the National Court of Justice, and especially because it's the court of the UN, it's better to form a consortium, to form an alliance of like-minded organizations or individuals, approach one of the existing organizations working on wildlife crimes. Then they can assist you with that. Let me give you an example. I mean, WWF, international and also middle countries, they work a lot, especially WWF Hong Kong, because it is the center of illegal wildlife trade going to mainland China. We have a program in ICN called Traffic, which is really trafficking. So I think what you can do is you can approach IUCN and then we can refer you to the right teams, organization, program who can help you make that cost. But it's difficult for me to be specific because environmental crimes are too broad. So it really depends on what we're talking about, and you can be helpful. But we're more than happy to connect you with the right organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campilan. I think we can still accommodate 2 more questions. First, and then second na po si Sir JC. Salamat po. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Good morning. So my question will be for Mr. Poch Enriquez. So I know a little bit about net zero, low carbon financing. And if I'm not mistaken, it's only been in the recent years since they've considered biodiversity financing. Parang, I believe ngayon, parang recently lang nila na-consider na may gumawa ng framework for biodiversity. So in my opinion, I think the pitfall of net zero and like low carbon investing and financing is they focus too much on the GHG emissions. Like it's only about the number to achieve like net zero emissions. And we also have that yung controversial na concept ng carbon offsets. So ayun lang. So I guess my question is, can you comment on the low carbon investment bill's consideration on biodiversity? So if mayroon ba silang consideration, how do they take into account yung biodiversity within the framework towards the yung net zero 2050 target? Yun lang.
Okay, thank you. The short answer is there's no consideration for biodiversity in the LCEI bill, and that would be similar to a lot of the government's current targets. Most of it is focused on emissions, and I guess that's the pitfall that we have in addressing the climate crisis. No, if our decision makers are mostly concerned about emissions, then we fail to consider yung ecosystem services that's associated with biodiversity. I think that would be the challenge for CSOs and for the academe to let them know that the climate crisis doesn't end with emissions and there should be more action beyond it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Enriquez. And Sir, kindly state your name po and affiliation. Thank you so much.
I'm JC Gonzalez from UP Los Baños. My question is for Dr. Campilan. Sir, good morning po. A lot of us in BCSP are members of IUCN specialist groups. I agree. Marami po. Taas po kami mga specialist groups. And also we're actually also members of IUCN through MBCFI. So we're also a lot of us work together to do the red list. Marami po dito ay members po ng TWG. I'm also a member of PARLC, which is, kami po yung nag-follow nung IUCN red list to do the PARLC. So my question is, what is your opinion po with the Philippine red list in terms of 9147? Hindi po namin kailangan sundin yung system ng IUCN, and we're building our own system to build the red list. And are there any contradictions that you might think that may cause in the future?
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very honored to meet you. You have many more years of experience working with IUCN probably than I do. I just joined IUCN about 4 years ago. To your question on the RLE, now I think it's a question, on the red list. I think it's a question about global standards themselves. You know, the red list is a global standard for the species ecosystem. TBA is a standard. We need to understand what they are. They are meant to provide the latest in global scientific knowledge. They provide high integrity application of the red list. They provide harmonization so that data from one country to the other are comparable. And then you can aggregate them and produce the global picture. That's what a global standard is about. It is not meant to straitjacket the application of these global standards at the national level. Talk about KBA. I'll use KBA as an example as you're discussing it. Yes, there's the global KBA, and you need to align with 11 of the criteria, but you don't need to fully align with them all. There are gradients to it. So the same with the red list. The red list, you can develop it as a national tool and be inspired and adapt what we had globally, and that is fine. The question is when you use the red list data to then become consolidated and apply at the global level, that's where the harmonization comes in. But it's not a black and white thing. The important thing is that we use the same framing. And since you talk about the red list of species, I think the next most exciting thing is the red list of ecosystems. So for those of you who are already maybe accredited, who are already certified as the red list of species auditors and assessors, think about the red list of ecosystem because it's the next big thing. So as I mentioned earlier, DNR just sent us a request 2 weeks back on the red list of ecosystems. And they are complementary because in the end, biodiversity is about the species and the ecosystems. And our message to DNR and many others, WCS, they were there in the consultation, is look, try to use the global standard to make it work on what is best and relevant in the Philippines. But at the same time, we can look at the middle ground and how we can make sure that the assessment data that you produce can become part of the global data sets that we generate and provide that. So I think this is an opportunity for conversation. I think my point is, it's not black and white. It's not, you don't just say, this is a red list and this is not the red list. There are many different gradients to it. But happy to talk, and I hope to connect with all of you, to visit UPLB soon.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Dr. Campilan and Sir JC. Okay, that's all the time that we have for our open forum. Maraming salamat po, Sir Pocholo and Dr. Campila. You can approach them after our session, or you can communicate them via their communication channels. This brings us to the end of our plenary session focusing on climate. Thank you so much to all of our esteemed speakers for sharing their insights and experiences. Our audience members can also share their learnings and favorite bits from the symposium on social media. Just use the hashtags #BCSP32 and #BiodiversityPH. Up next, we will be having today's first set of concurrent oral presentations, which I think okay. Which I think will start by 10:45 a.m. in just a few minutes. Please proceed to the assigned rooms at the Henry Lucid III Library for each of the following sessions. For parasite session, proceed to the conference room. Functional ecology, proceed to the Knowledge for Development Center or KDC. For species biology, proceed to the American Corner. And for the flora session, please proceed to the gallery room. Reminders for the BCSP members and the General Assembly, saglit lang po. The 11th General Assembly of the BCSP will happen today at 4 p.m. here at the Rose Memorial Auditorium. Only members in good standing, including new members, will be allowed inside the auditorium during the session po. And that is by 4:30 this afternoon. After the BCSP General Assembly at 6:30 p.m. naman po will be our BCSP Fellowship Night, sponsored by the Office of the Iloilo City Mayor Raisa Treñas. This is open hindi lamang po sa BCSP members kundi po sa lahat po ng attendees. Open po ang BCSP Fellowship Night later at 6:30 p.m. Sa mga hindi po makakapunta at makakapasok ng General Assembly, balik na lamang po dito sa Rose Memorial Hall by 6:30 p.m. We also need your help with fulfilling our sponsor commitments. Please sign all the attendance sheets at the Secretariat desk. Again, for all of the student grantees, kindly approach the Secretariat desk for your reimbursement forms. And another last announcement for high school and undergrad poster presenters, kindly look for Ms. May Loidiesmos to get your freebies. This is a first come first served basis sa pagkuha po ng freebies, and this is only for high school and undergrad competing presenters. No? One of your freebies is this, ang kaibigan kong Kalaw. This is a children's book produced by BCSP as well in partnership with Team Energy Foundation. Okay? Para sa mga interested, this is also for sale sa ating desk outside. Deadline of voting for the new set of Board of Trustees, 12 noon today. Okay? And open din po yun para sa mga new members, kaya magpa-member na po kayo. Muli, ako po si Anton Lorenzo at maraming salamat po sa pagsama sa amin for this morning's plenary session. See you around po. Salamat!